Well, hello everyone. I welcome everyone watching here and online. I tried to reschedule this to create the least conflict, so it didn't really make a difference. But hopefully people are watching this at home will learn something. Before I get to the actual exam, are there any procedural questions? I'll take substantive questions at the end of class, but any procedural questions on your mind? Yes, sir.
So it's going to be 2 questions and each have 1,000?
Yes. Yep. The same way it's been the last 6 years. Actually, 4 years.
Oh, okay.
I had actually, when I first started teaching, I had made the word limit 500, which I thought was fair, but I had to change it for a lot of reasons, so now we're stuck with 1,000. It was actually a lot easier to do 500 words, not just for grading, but for writing it, because you'd have to go right to the answer. You couldn't dance around, but I made 1,000, so 1,000.
So it's 2 questions, like being able to calculate like 1,000 per question. Like, how is it going to be in our exemplify? Like, are we gonna do it next and it'll come up to a separate page? You get what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah, I don't know this new software, right? So I haven't used this new software yet. My best bet is do question number 1 and do a word count.
And just make sure you're underneath.
Yeah, and then do question number 2.
As long as we're 2,000 within the whole, like the
No. Each question is 1,000.
Each question 1,000. So make sure.
Yeah. So do question number 1 and do your word count, and then some additional.
So
I don't know if it does a separate word count for each question.
You can do like a.
Do you select?
Yeah.
You can like highlight it.
You can like highlight it, and then you click on it, and it'll show you like.
Okay.
How many total, and then how many.
It's like highlighted, and then it's a button in the left, the top left, and it like drops down.
So in the event I want to go back and change, and I add things to it, like my first answer, I just highlight it, and it'll tell me how many I have. Okay.
That's what I thought. I wasn't sure, but thank you for that clarification. Yeah, the procedure, and it's really stuffy here, isn't it? They actually, to save money, they save power on the weekends, and that's why half the lights are off, and it looks very creepy. And that's why they turn off the AC as well. So there's probably heat on also this weekend. Okay, so my goal for today is twofold. I'm going to go over the first question from the 2015 fall exam. Then I'm going to go over the A+ answer from the 2015 exam. Then I will take whatever questions you have. If you want to ask my office afterwards, that's fine. I'll go upstairs and you can stay here. And I will be here as long as you need. Today was indeed the cutoff for questions, so you will ask whatever you want until I leave today. And that will be my, my parting farewell. The exam's coming very soon, so at this point you should have more or less everything in order. But last minute lingering, nagging questions, I will be happy to help with.
You're gonna tell us what's wrong with that A+ answer.
Yeah, it's not very good.
No, it's not.
So maybe I'm a better teacher, or maybe that was just a really bad class. I can't recall.
I was trying to figure out how that was the A+.
I was looking over this morning. I had the exact same reaction. So maybe what we can do is explain why that one was not correct.
Okay.
But I don't know. Maybe I've become a better teacher. I don't know. But the point I want to convey is to get the A+, you don't have to be perfect, and in this case, wasn't very good. There was a lot of wrong stuff in there, so maybe you spot it, and that'd be a good learning exercise.
But then it just confused me even more.
Yeah, there's no good way of doing this. I honestly, I don't remember why that was A+. That might have just been a weak section. It happens. Some classes are better than others. Sometimes maybe I do it well, sometimes I don't. So it's always a surprise to me when I grade, because you think you work really hard this semester, the kids get it, and then you see just like, what were they thinking? So I got my common law papers came in yesterday. I haven't looked at them close. I did a quick scan. They usually give it to you 24 hours after the exam, so I'll get your paper probably on Tuesday or so, or maybe Wednesday. So I will grade them as quickly as I can. All right, so let's look at the exam. The first bit is the instruction, which spells out as clearly as I can. There are 2 questions, each with 1,000 words. They both should total no more than 2,000, but each individual one should be 1,000, and I do a separate word count. So If you make one of them 1,500 and the second one 500, you are in trouble. Don't do that. Okay? It's completely open book. Bring whatever you like. It doesn't matter. It won't help you. If you find yourself looking through your notes, you're probably wasting a lot of time. You have 3 hours standard. You know the drill. You guys are pros by this point. The way I suggest you approach these questions is like this. You first want to read the specific instructions, of course, right? And the reason why is I often give you little bits of information that are pushing you in the right direction. Specifically, what sort of jurisdiction you're in. Now, if you've been a studious student and read my old exams, I almost always ask about the common law. I don't promise I'll do that again, but I almost always do. Simply because the common law has rules, and the modern stuff is all about fluff and fairness. And I don't like fairness very much. It's not something I can test on. We all have different notions of fairness. So this one says the year is 1920. You're a law clerk for the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Missouri. The reason why that 1920 bit will become relevant later, but just keep attention to what time you're in. It doesn't matter. You're asked to make a memo of 1,000 words addressing 5 issues concerning, I did the A, B, C, D thing, right? Abe, Bob, Cam, Dave, Oliver, and Tim. Missouri applies all common law property rules in the restatement first and has a notice recording statute. So the fact that I tell you that there's a notice recording statute means there's some sort of recording question, right? I don't give you a piece of information unless it's relevant. If I give you the statute of limitations is 10 years, whatever it is, right? You should assume there's probably an adverse possession or a prescription question on the exam. I don't give you that unnecessarily. So the little bits of information I put up here are going to be very helpful and essential to getting your frame right. Okay? So after you read the instructions, my suggestion is to drop down and read the questions. There's always going to be 5 questions. Here we go. In a memo of no more than 1,000 words, again, repeating myself, please address how the Missouri Supreme Court to resolve the following 5 issues. So this first question says, a member of the Homeowners Association files suit against Bob seeking to set aside the sale of lot number 2 because he's in violation of covenant number 3. Okay, so without reading anything, you know you have a covenant question, right? With involving a homeowner association. So what case did we discuss with homeowner association? Who knows? Just a shout out. What's the name of the case? Neponsit, very good. So you know that Neponsit is going to be a case that's relevant to this exam, and you better be damn sure you cite Neponsit, which I don't think this paper actually did. Lauren, shake your head. I don't remember what happened. I looked at it this morning like, whoa, what is going on here? Was I, anyway.
And see, that's why I thought it wasn't important for the midterm, because nobody cited when that many cases.
Maybe, I don't know. I can't remember what happened that year. I haven't taught this class in 2 years. Maybe I've just been a much better teacher in 2 years. It's conceivable. I don't know. Okay. So who should prevail? I know, please keep in mind that the year is 1920. In other words, what I'm getting at here is it's 1920. Shelley v. Kramer hadn't happened yet. So I actually want you to do here is not give me a common law answer in equal protection. I want you to resolve this on property law grounds. You're in the wrong class if you start talking about Shelley v. Kramer and 5th Amendment and 14th Amendment. That's not what I want you to talk about here, in this question at least. Question number 2. A member of the Homeowners Association files suit against Bob, claiming that he's in violation of Covenant 1 for having a 6-story tower. Now, without even reading the facts, wait a minute, a 6-story tower, what's going on there, right? Well, tall things might violate zoning laws. They might violate covenants about having height of buildings. Maybe there's a shadow, right? This gets you thinking about what I could be asking about. Okay, in the next sentence, the members argue that Bob should have been on notice that a 6-story tower be prohibited. Who should prevail? Okay, so that's covenant number 1. Question number 3 says, the Homeowners Association files suit against Bob who refuses to pay the annual fee for violating covenant number 2. The Homeowners Association concedes that the covenant cannot be enforced as written but argues that this should be construed as an equitable servitude enforced by the courts. Who should prevail? Again, we did a couple cases on the equitable servitudes. We did the Naponza case, and also the Tulk versus Moxie. That was the English case with the park, the little monument inside the park. Okay, so these are the things you should be talking about. Number 4, it says, Dave sues Cam for nuisance because the tower from lot 1 casts a shadow on lot 2. Okay, so this is a nuisance question with air and light. Okay? And then the last one says, Tim sues Dave seeking to quiet title and determine the true owner of lot number 1. Who should prevail? Okay, not too much information about why they're suing each other, so it doesn't help you too much. All right? Now let's walk through the question. And the way I want to do this, as I'm walking through the question, is to think out loud what I would be outlining were I in your spot as a student taking this exam tomorrow. So it begins. It says, Maple Street has historically been an upper-class residential block in St. Louis. There are 50 homes on the cul-de-sac. All of the lots on Maple Street have a one-family house that is 2 or 3 stories tall. Now, why am I giving that a piece of information? We did cases, right? Was the McLean case, the one with the gas station in Detroit, where if everything around you looks a certain way, that probably should put you at some sort of notice that there may be some restriction on your property not to build something that doesn't fit within that norm. Okay. The next sentence, it says, on June 31st of 1915, 35 of the 50 owners on the block agreed to form a homeowner association. Now, what's relevant here? They were not all in agreement. They didn't get all the pieces of property. So can you enforce a covenant when you only have partial buy-in? Can you enforce an equitable servitude when you only have partial buy-in? The actual case from Shelley v. Kramer, you'll recall, is very similar to this, where not all the homeowners on the block agreed to this sort of covenant. Also, we remember from our study of covenants, how do you make covenants binding with horizontal privity? It has to be involved in a transaction for the sale of land. Here, was there any transaction for the sale of land? No, they just slapped on a covenant. Which is why I think the entire case of Shelley v. Kramer could be dismissed on property law grounds, because these weren't binding on anyone, because there's lack of horizontal privity under the common law. Don't tell that to the Supreme Court that they want to go do something else with the case, but humble property professor, what do I know? So, there are 3 covenants then. So, I mean, as you're reading this, you have to keep in mind, are these even binding as a matter of horizontal privity? Equitable servitude, right, doesn't require that. But for covenants to be binding and run with the land, you need to have this privity horizontal. Okay, so the first covenant is this. All lot owners on Maple Street covenant to maintain one-family residential houses that are no smaller than 2 stories and no taller than 4 stories. By the way, the word covenant can be used as a verb. It's not just a noun. It basically means you promise, right? So just if you see that, you know what it means. So the lot owners agreed to maintain one-family residential houses that are no smaller than 2 stories and no smaller than 2 stories and no taller than 4 stories, right? So in theory, could a homeowners association have such a covenant that restricts the height of buildings? And the answer is yes, they could. Okay. Covenant number 2. Okay. All lot owners on Maple Street covenant to pay to the homeowners association an annual fee of $1 for every 100 square feet of land they own. This money will be used to pay for maintenance and landscaping of common areas. This is more or less Naponza, copied verbatim. I think I might have copied the language almost one for one, I don't remember. But this is Naponza. Can, in theory, you have a covenant that imposes a condition about paying money? And the answer is probably not. Could you have an equitable servitude that accomplishes this? And this gets into the question of what touch and concern means, right? Does it touch and concern the land? In the Ponza case went one way, maybe go the other way, under the common law, but that's what I'm getting at here, right? Does the requirement to pay money not to the adjacent property owner, but to the homeowners association, right? That's the key point. The money's going to the HSA. I'm sorry, not the wrong topic. Homeowners Association, HOA. Too much Obamacare. The HOA instead of the dominant tenement. Okay. Number 3. All lot owners on Maple Street covenant to only sell their properties to persons of the Caucasian race. This is Shelley. Okay. So now we know the covenants were recorded by each of the 35 lot owners who agreed to join the homeowners association. However, they were neither signed nor recorded by the other 15 lot owners on Maple Street. Notably, among the 15 who refused to join were several African American families, which was indeed the case in Shelley v. Kramer. Okay. So the important point here is, 1, can the covenant be binding on people who didn't sign it? And 2, even if it's not binding as a covenant, should a person been on a notice that they couldn't do this anyway? This was the issue in the McLean case from Detroit, or from Michigan. Whether or not the restriction was in their chain of title, should they in any event have been aware that these restrictions exist by looking around the block and seeing what was going on? Okay. Okay, so now we have this question. Abe has lived on lots 1 and 2 on Maple Street since 1913. He refused to join the homeowner association and did not record covenants for either lot. So Abe knew about this agreement, but he didn't join it. Query: was Abe under any obligation to tell prospective buyers about these restrictive covenants in the block? Okay, so now Bob tells Abe that he wants to purchase lot number 2. And he wants to build a 6-story tower for bird watching. Again, query: was Abe under any obligation to tell Bob, no, you can't do that. There's this neighborhood covenant about to hide the buildings. Bob admits that the tower will cast a shadow over lot 1 and block sunlight. Bob offers to pay for a covenant that will allow him to block the sunlight over lot number 1. This is basically the I think Lindsay was the only person here that day, but the Coase theorem, right? Remember Lindsay? Yeah, exactly. It's a bargaining chip, right? Where you basically pay to block someone else's sunlight. You can do that. Abe agrees to the covenant. But here's the important point though, right? The covenant is included on the deed with the transaction of land, right? When the land is purchased, when lot number 2 is purchased, it's purchased with the covenant on the deed. And that's a very important piece of language. That is what creates the horizontal privity, right? That's what creates the horizontal privity. Under the common law, this is the only way by which you can slap a covenant on a piece of land. It has to be involved in a land transaction. You can't just pop it on top of the deed in the abstract. Okay, so Abe agrees to the covenant. Abe agrees to the covenant. On January 1st, Abe sells lot number 2 to Bob with a covenant deed. Now, I also have this other fact. Bob is not Caucasian. Bob did not record his deed. Okay. If I were you, I would keep a very close eye on the dates. I try to make them as easy as possible, like January 1st, February 1st, March, right? The dates are usually important, especially if there's a reporting question, because you're going to have to see at various points in time what a person knew, what should they have known, right, and what information was available. Any questions so far? I'm trying to walk through this as painlessly as possible. Okay, so now just another fact, right? On February 1st, Bob leases lot number 2 to Cam for 1 year. Over the following month, with Bob's permission, Cam proceeds to construct the six-story tower. Now, why is the lease important here? With covenants, there are two concepts. There's vertical privity, the caprice, right? Vertical privity, no. There's horizontal privity, and there's vertical privity, right? Actually, I was watching Urban Cowboy last night. You ever see that movie? I'd never seen it before. And there's one scene where you can almost see South Texas. It's like, oh, there's one scene where John Travolta is like in that other girl's apartment. You can see Houston House. You can see where the Amagi Bank building is, and like to the corner, you can almost see the tower. It's like very. I Google mapped it, and I just trying to figure out where they were. They're at 2016 Maine, you know, the apartment by the elevated. So next time you watch the movie, now, the other thing which my girlfriend noticed is he was driving from Spur to Pasadena. Under no circumstance would he drive from Warren. He wouldn't come downtown. It makes no sense. He's coming from like where Lubbock is to Pasadena. Would go around the downtown anyway. I don't remember why I brought that up, but oh yeah, leasing. That's right, because it was rented. The reason why leasing is important is when you want to get vertical privity, there must be the conveyance of the entire estate. That is, if the person up here has fee simple, in order for there to be a vertical privity, you need to give fee simple. Okay? If the one on top has fee simple and the one on the bottom only has a lease, that means there's still bundle of sticks, right? There's still sticks left over. Under the common law, the burden won't run there. Benefits will run with a lesser estate, but the burden will not run when it's a lesser estate. So just reading this, right? Cam can get the benefit, but not the burden. Cam can get the benefit, not the burden. And here, what's the benefit? Aha, blocking the sunlight, right? He can cast a shadow over the other lot. That's his benefit. So the way this covenant works is it bestows a benefit on lot number 2 and a burden on lot number 1. So even though it's a lease, the benefit still flows down, and Cam can avail himself of the benefit of this covenant, right?
Means that the benefit will be casting the.
Yeah, the benefit is he can go bird watching, he can block a shadow, right? That's the benefit bestowed.
What would be the burden in that situation?
There is no burden on lot number 2. The burden falls on lot number 1.
Oh, that they don't have, okay.
Yeah. So if you're the owner of lot, I don't think I put in this question, but let's say that, I didn't, but let's say Dave buys lot number 1 from Abe. If he buys in fee simple, right, he's stuck with the burden, and he can be, he has to allow his own sunlight to be blocked. So anything with a covenant is two sides of the same coin, right? One side's going to benefit from it, and the other side burdens from it. It can be reciprocal, right? You can have lot number 1, emitting smoke, and lot number 2 doesn't care about it, right? Imagine this. I'll just make up an example off the top of my head. Lot number 2 builds a tower, and lot number 1 builds a factory, right? And say, look, I'll block your sunlight, and you can screw up my air with your factory. Okay, deal, right? So each side gets a benefit, and each side gets a burden. But in order for the burdens to fall down vertically, you need to have vertical privity. And that requires the complete estate to be transferred. Yes, David?
But, so in lot 1, what if I had a lease, I didn't have a shadow, is there?
Because, okay, so let me take David's question, right? Let's say that Abe, in fact, leased lot number 1 to someone else, right? The burden would not run, right? The burden would not run. So what happens then? Who gets sued in the event of the, who would sue whom?
I would sue the.
You sue your landlord. No.
Oh, the land. Oh,
You sue your
yes,
landlord,
okay,
right?
Yes, okay. Yes.
So let's say, this is not the facts, so let's just make up David's example. Dave leases lot number 1 from Bob. And Dave's like, what the hell? I have no sunlight, right? Where's my sunlight? I'm not in privity with this other guy. I'm not bound by this covenant. I'm going to sue my landlord and get money from my landlord. The landlord is bound because he had the original horizontal privity. That's the key, right? The tenant on a lease is not bound. But what if he had purchased in fee simple? Then he'd be screwed. If Dave bought lot number 1 from Abe, he would have the full bundle of sticks. He is now restricted by the covenant, rented the land. He's screwed. He can't do anything. He can't complain. make sure to go back to your lecture notes and reread remember that diagram with the vertical and the horizontal? Just go back and rewatch that lecture. I've been trying to summarize it here, but there's a lot of moving parts there, and this is maybe the reason why the A+ answer screwed up is I didn't teach well enough that year. I don't know. I'm baffled. I was reading something, what the hell was I thinking? But I mean, you read the A+ answer in your midterm. It was a good paper. Yeah, I mean, maybe your class is just a lot smarter. I don't know. Maybe you guys are just going to kill it. God, 2015. Yeah, the other ones just took the bar exam. I don't know. Maybe it was a lost cause. But I don't know. I don't know. But you guys are going to have to work your ass off, and don't do that in 2 years, please. Not for. Please don't do it for that. Study as hard as you can. Don't. I'm sure they told you this, but if you watch like 90% of the videos, you almost like guaranteed rate of passing. Like we have numbers in this. The people who failed didn't watch the damn videos. Right, Barbary, Capital, whatever company you want, right? We have, they stalk you. They know what you're watching and how often you actually hit play and hit pause. If you actually watch through your 90% videos on the schedule you're supposed to, your pass rates are in the 80s, right? High 80s. These are self-inflicted wounds that I can't fathom why people do themselves. They work their butts off 3 years of law school and they can't go through this program for the summer. It's frustrating as hell. I will leave you with this encouragement. That's your full-time job for the summer. Do nothing but that. If you look at the second-time pass rate, it drops very low. It's like 50%. So if you fail once, you're probably going to fail again. At that point, eventually people take a third or fourth time to get to it, but that's a year of your life. It's only offered twice a year. So July and February. So we know who's not doing the homework for the bar exam. We know, we can measure that. It's very frustrating because we can't baby you and yell at you and call on you during the summer. Sorry, I rant over. But we care very deeply about this, so take everything seriously. What was it? Thank you for the question, David. It's your fault. No. So Bob leases lot number 2 to Cam for a year. Over the following month, with Bob's permission, Cam constructs a 6-story tower. Again, so Cam is not bound by the covenant because he has only a lease. Cam benefits from the covenant because he has a lease, and the benefit runs even in the absence of vertical privity. Okay, the next paragraph. Next month. On March 10th, 1916, Dave expressed an interest in acquiring lot 1 from Abe. Dave does a title search at the records office and finds the following chain of title. So what I tried to do here, and I think I've done this once before, was give you a simulated chain of title that's not too insane, but that could maybe give you a couple difficulties. So we remember from our class, we always start off with the grantee index. Of course, the grantor is the seller, the grantee is the buyer. Why do we start with the grantee index? Because the only name you know is who you're buying it from. That's the only name you're aware of, right? Okay? So you know you're buying from Abe. Okay? So that's the name you start looking for. That's what I tried to represent in this chart. So the first name you have is Abe. And so we find 2 transactions with Abe. Okay? Abe acquired, there was a transaction between Abe, everyone see this? It's a little bit hard to see. Okay. So the transaction from Abe and Oliver. Right? Oliver, O, right? Original. Oliver sold lot 1 to Abe. Quit claim, deed, and fee simple. You recall that quit claim means there's no warranties of any sort. The date of the deed is January 1st, 1913. But it was not recorded until 2 years later. 3 years later, in January of 1916. Okay? But wait a minute. You got a problem. Oliver, the same O, also sold lot 1 to Tim. Okay, with a general warranty deed and fee simple. And we know a general warranty deed means you have all the various protections on it, right? It's the full bumper-to-bumper warranty. The transaction happened in 1900, so well before this. But it was not recorded until February 15th, 1916. So when Abe made the transaction in 1913, there was no record of it. When he went to go record it in 1916, there was still no record of it. So did Abe have notice of any sort of this prior transaction with Oliver and Tim? None. So Abe would actually prevail under the notice recording statute, right? The fault here lies with Tim, who took, 16 years to record his damn deed. Okay? We also have this bit with Sam. We know that Sam gave lot number 2 to Abe, quitclaim deed in 1914, and was recorded in 1916. We don't stop there, we keep going. Then we work our way back up on the other side. We go to the grantor index. And the significance of the grantor index is the list begins with the seller, not the buyer. So we see here, basically it's reversed, right? Oliver sold the land, lot 1 to Abe with a quitclaim deed in 1913. That was recorded in 1916. In neither of these dates would Abe have been on notice of this prior transaction to Sam. So again, he prevails with the record notice. Oliver and Tim, basically it's a mirror image, right? But the point that you should have taken away from that chart is under a notice statute, Abe prevails because he had no notice of any sort that Oliver was a scam artist. Again, presume on the exam that someone's a scam artist. It happens every year. Okay, so now Abe on March 1916 sells lot 1 to Dave. In fee simple, the general warranty deed. Dave records his deed, and we have some litigation. Okay. I remember thinking to myself, if the person didn't read this question carefully, and they get down to question 5, think, who the hell's Tim, right? I remember thinking, I was like, yeah, I think it's who the hell's Tim? Because Tim's not mentioned anywhere in the fact pattern except for these little boxes, right? So if you didn't read this carefully, like, who the hell is Tim, right? Was that? You know, who the hell is Tim moment?
Yeah.
I knew it. Like it takes me like a full day to write these questions. And like, I try to anticipate every conceivable issue that you guys can raise, because once I write it, it's out. I can't like answer your question. So I was thinking like, yeah, they're gonna ask me who the hell Tim is. So thank you, Alex. Anyway, but yeah, so unless you read carefully, Tim, right, you know, it's mentioned in 2 little boxes, it's not obvious. And you wouldn't even think to look out for Tim. But if you took my advice and read the questions first, you know Tim is someone you have to look out for. And to make it even more obvious, I put the names of all the people up here in the instructions, so who is Tim? There's Tim. So let's look at the questions, right? Alright, so member of homeowner association files suit against Bob seeking to set aside the sale of lot number 2 because it's in violation of covenant number 3, right? This was the covenant concerning you couldn't sell the property to non-Caucasians. Who should prevail, right? So I'm gonna now jump back and forth between the A+ answer, and Lauren and I can take it apart. Yes, ma'am. No, seriously, I was looking at this morning like, man, wow, this is, maybe I'm just trying to be a better professor, and I don't know. Was it?
Be nice this semester, just like you was that semester.
Well, I mean, that's the thing with the curve, though. When you have a smarter class.
I know y'all too.
I think I told you this once before, but when I was in law school, one my contract professor was a law and econ guy, and he said, the curve is a 3.0. That was our curve at GMU, which is basically a B. He said, if all of you agree right now to a B, we can just skip the class. But 100%, everyone has to agree. Problem is, you'll never, there's a holdout from it, you'll never get 100% to agree
Jesse
with it.
would never agree to
Yeah,
that.
Jesse would never agree to
I wouldn't have agreed to it, hell, there's no way, no how. Anyway, alright, so let's see what this person, wrote, and I can't recall the person is, I didn't look up the name, so I have no idea if it's he or she, I don't remember. The 14th Amendment, it shall be clear we do not apply at this time. This would be considered a real covenant, in which one must have the notice, the covenant must touch and concern the land, there must be intent to bind successor to the previous state. What's wrong with that? Why is that a wrong statement of law? What are they describing right there?
Well,
Equitable service.
Yeah.
Servitude.
Yeah, Lauren, do I add something?
I was about to say that it's equitable service.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. That is the test, and later in the exam, the person uses the exact same 4 factors for the equitable servitude, which is why it's perplexing me. But that's wrong. Okay, but then they actually get back more or less on the right track. Under common law, for burden to run, one must have both horizontal and vertical privity, whereas for the benefit to run, you need only vertical privity. That's correct. The burden here is on lot 2. No, that's not right either. So the burden here is on lot 1, right? The burden is on lot 1 because that's the one whose light's getting blocked. The benefit is on lot number 2. Okay? And we discussed this before. Does the benefit run down? And the answer is yes. Even though the lease is a lesser estate than the fee simple, under the common law, the benefit still runs. Okay? I think the
Will we
answer.
talk about that lease here?
Let me keep reading. Let's see if they stumble at the answer. The burden here is on lot 2, the surveillance land, therefore must look at see both privities are there. Abe owned the land at the time, the covenant was mad. Don't worry about typos, they happen. I won't kill you for them. It was a separate land transaction other than just recording the covenant as part of the privity. Okay. No, they don't mention the lease, right? So that was missed also. I'm glad you guys caught that. The second part, though, was about record notice, about whether looking around would be adequate. If you don't see any people who are not white in the block, is that record notice? I think that probably would work under the common law anyway, because you didn't have that sort of duty to look around. I think that's probably also incorrect. I don't remember why this one got the A+. I'm actually somewhat flummoxed by it, but I appreciate the fact that you all appreciate that it's not correct. So the short answer is, to summarize it briefly, there is horizontal privity. There is no vertical privity. Okay? So the benefits would run, but the burdens would not. So therefore, they're not bound in any event. Right? Moreover, could you have a covenant under the common law controlling the sort of person who lives on a piece of property? That, I think, is the more interesting question. Right? Usually a covenant is how you use the land, not who lives on it. So I'm not even sure under the common law you could even have such a covenant as that. But in no effect would this covenant be binding. Again, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. There's no horizontal privity because there was no transaction with the sale of land, right? So there's no horizontal, there's no vertical. The burden cannot run. So I don't think this is an enforceable covenant at law. And everyone knows what I mean when I say at law versus an equity, right? When I say a real covenant at law, I'm talking about a traditional covenant. When I say in equity, I'm talking about equitable servitudes. It doesn't make much of a difference in courts today, but back in England, you'd have a court of equity and a court of law. You actually have to file it in a different jurisdiction. Today we have unified courts, but you still bring in either attribute of the law. So yes, that answer was all messed up. I'm sorry, question?
There's not horizontal privity.
Yeah, I said it wrong. I'm sorry, there's not horizontal privity.
And you don't need horizontal or vertical for the benefit to run. You need both for the burden to run, I know that. And you don't need either for the benefit.
No, for the benefit to run, you need horizontal.
Oh, for the benefit, you do need horizontal?
Yeah, but not vertical.
You need vertical? No, you don't need
For the benefit.
You do not need horizontal for the benefit. You need it for the burden.
I always thought you need a connection.
No, you need horizontal always, just you don't need vertical. No, under the common law, you always need horizontal.
For the benefit to run as well?
No, I'm talking about real covenants.
Yeah.
No, you always need horizontal, you just don't need vertical.
And equitable is just vertical?
Yeah, equitable, equitable servitude is a 4-factor test, it's different. So, let's say again. When you're talking about real covenants at law, right? For real covenants at law, for the burden to run, you need both horizontal and vertical privity. But for the benefit to run, you only need horizontal. Okay?
Yeah.
You don't need vertical privity for benefits to run for real covenants at law. For equitable servitude, you have this other 4-factor test about touching concerning the land. It's a totally different situation. Sound okay? Good. You're always, in other words, Lindsay, in order for anyone to be bound, you need that initial horizontal privity for it to go anywhere. Okay? If I say something wrong, I think I'm right. Okay.
I have in my past notes that you do not need horizontal privity at common law for the benefit to run.
I don't know.
Like, you need it initially, like, you need the horizontal privity initially to establish a covenant, but then
Yeah.
if it goes to another person,
Right,
then
you
don't.
always need, right, I ran the board once entire year, right? But, right, you have, was it Abe, what the hell's the other guy's name? It was B, right?
Mhm.
B, right? And then it was to C, right? Okay.
Okay.
This horizontal privity at common law is always required for any real covenant to exist. Unless there's horizontal privity, you don't have a real covenant at all. Okay? The difference is whether it's a burden or a benefit. If it's a benefit going down, you don't need vertical privity. There could be a lease. If it's a burden, though, that is, you can't have a factor or something like that, then you do need the vertical privity, and the entire bundle of 6 must be transferred. Make sense? Yes, Kevin?
Can there ever be vertical privity, between a true owner and an adverse possessor?
I think I should ask your question again. I think I understand, but I want to make sure I'm getting it right.
Would there ever be privity between, adverse possessors and original owners, so say the seller sells, their entire estate to a subsequent purchaser, but unbeknownst to them, there's someone who already has quiet title to the.
Oh, so you're saying, let me see if I can, so let's say you had B, right?
Yeah.
But you actually have a squatter, right? So,
And they sell their property to.
so what happens, and I'll ask you this question back, okay? If S is the squatter, right, and acquires Blackacre, does B have anything to convey? Can B actually convey the estate?
Not if S has already quiet title and proved all elements. Okay.
Yeah, so you have to ask yourself is, does B actually have the title to convey if there's a squatter on the side? Make sense? Yeah, covenants is probably one of the hardest topics of the semester, that's why I made it for the review session.
So just so I make sure I understand, so you're saying horizontal always has to be there?
A common law, not a modern.
common law.
A modern, they basically dispense with these requirements, but I don't bother asking about it.
Okay, and then for vertical privity, it depends on whether it's a benefit or a burden.
Yes, ma'am.
So in this case, it wasn't a horizontal privity
Nope.
because it wasn't sold with the land? It wasn't
How
attached
many,
to
how
land
many,
when it was
right,
sold.
well, there's two factors, right? There was no land transaction, but also did all the neighbors agree on the block?
No,
So there's twofold reasons why there's not horizontal, right? There's no horizontal privity first because there was no land transaction, and second, not all the neighbors even agreed to it. So you can't bind people who weren't part of the agreement.
Oh, cause this is the homeowners association
ma'am.
filing suit, okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, and that's
Because
exactly the
they
point.
didn't tell them.
It's the, and that's exactly the point in the Ponzi, right? It was not the neighbor requiring these payments, it was this fictional entity, this homeowner association. And under the common law, a covenant was between party A and party B, right? Not between some abstract organization. This might have been why this A+ answer was so crappy, because the class totally whiffed on the question, and this was the best they had. I can't remember, but this was a hard question, I guess. Very short too. It's always a struggle because you think, oh, you want to make the question short so students can finish, but the shorter the questions, there's less information, it's actually harder for you. Anyway, David. And then Valerie next, yeah.
Okay, I apologize, but I still find myself, having a little trouble distinguishing like covenant versus equitable servitude. Like right here, in the simple diagram, like C, how would C possibly gain something through equitable servitude?
Well, with
like
equitable
injunction?
servitude, it's that four-factor test, which the student wrote up here in the wrong place, right? Do the parties have notice? Does the covenant touch and concern the servitude, right? But does the servitude touch and concern the land? Is there an intent to bind the successor and some sort of privity of the state, right? Those are the four factors to think about when you have an equitable servitude. The key point with an equitable servitude is you don't need the horizontal privity, right? You don't need to have the servitude placed on in a land transaction. It can happen by just slapping it on and signing an agreement, right? So while the homeowner association in this question is not valid as a real covenant at law, it could be valid as an equitable servitude because there's not a requirement of horizontal privity, right? And the question is, does this restriction, this paying money, touch and concern the land? And that was in a Ponzi case.
I read something, I can't remember what you just said, but would you agree, usually like with equitable servitude, the person doesn't want money, they want an injunction, or is that kind of a little too?
Yeah. So, as a matter of equity, right, usually the remedy in an equitable case is an injunction, right? Think of Tolk versus Moxie. This was the case in England. You had to use this, you had to keep the park, right? Remember that was the case? You have to keep the park there. That's the traditional method of an equitable servitude. The Neponset case, which was in the 1920s, I think, greenlighted the use of money damage, not money damage, but use of payment, right? Because usually you can't make a person on his property fee simple pay rent. This is more or less a form of rent. And the Neponset case blessed that. That was a novel innovation. They could actually have money being paid once you don't do fee simple to this other organization. Valerie, I think you had your hand up a minute ago.
So in general, you will start saying that this is not a real covenant, but then you would state that it might still be enforceable as an equitable servitude.
I would put that in there, yeah.
So what about the fact that A did not agree to have that covenant on his land?
So I think if you want to talk about equitable servitude, one of the requirements is notice, right?
Right.
This is, I think, actually the second half of the answer is actually getting at directly. Should B have been on notice that there might have been a racial restrictive covenant on this block?
Right. So he would have, but if it's not on A's land, does he still have to follow it?
Well, as an equitable servitude, if he had notice, right, that there was some sort of racial restrictive covenant, he could be bound by this as a matter of equity. But you have the problem of touch and concern, right? Does who lives in the land touch and concern the land? This is the Ponset case, right? There's this long discussion that's raised touch and concern. What does it mean? And the court basically said it means whatever they want it to mean. There's no actual meaning. But the Ponset case came, I think, sometime after this. So under the common law, I don't think a restriction of who can live on it would touch and concern the land. I think of that as a matter of land use, right? One family homes, no pollution, no factories, not the skin color of the residents.
I guess my question is not about whether who can live, let's say it's a normal covenant about height restriction.
Okay.
And if he lived there, let's say A did not agree to that covenant, he did not record it, it's not on his land.
Yeah.
He sells it to B, if he looks around,
Yes.
he should be put on notice. But he should be put on notice that that neighborhood has that type of covenant, but if A's land didn't have a covenant, he's still bound by equitable
Well, that's
servitude
the
to live
McLean
there?
case. Remember it was the gas station case?
Yeah.
Right, that was a case where, Michigan, where, everything's residential, and even though his chain of title didn't include this sort of restrictive covenant in it, he should be on notice by looking around. So as a matter of equity, you can impute that. Make sense? Very good question. I'm relieved the sorts of questions you're asking, because it shows you're thinking about these things at a very good level, so I'm actually reassured. Yes, ma'am?
Can you go into the touch and concern element of equitable servitude? I have like a very vague definition.
I know you do. It's the Ponza case. It's not your fault.
Yeah, I'd like something a little more concrete.
Oh, I would love something too. So, the Naponza case had these facts, right? The homeowner association created a rule that for every, was it 100 square foot, whatever it was, you had to pay a few dollars every month to this organization. And this organization would then use that money to pay for landscaping and other sorts of repairs. That didn't fit in with the traditional notion of a covenant, because usually a covenant was between party A and party B. You have one that benefits, one that burdens, and you have this bilateral, this two-way relationship. So the idea of whether something touches and concerns the land is, does it actually concern the land of the parties at issue, A and B? And right, not the skin color of the residents, but like how they're using it, whether there's a height restriction or they can't use residential versus commercial. What the Naponza case basically said, this is why your notes are probably not that good, is we don't really know what this phrase means, so we're going to read it to mean whatever we want it to mean. And anything that, what was the word, involves or affects the land, I can't remember the affects, right? I don't have my notes in front of me.
Relates to the-
Was it?
I just put it relates to the.
Relates.
property.
Was the word affects or relates? I can't remember.
Relates.
Relates, okay, I don't have my notes in front of me, yeah. So anything that relates to the property touches and concerns the land. So in other words, it cut out this third requirement of the equitable servitude rule period. It basically deleted it. So long as there's notice, I'm sorry, the second factor, there's notice, there's an intent to bind, and this is a privity of estate, right? It's effective. So as long as someone's on notice about it and there was an intent to make someone else bound by it, you're bound by the equitable servitude, and it will be enforced in a court of equity. What else? What other questions do you have on covenants and equitable servitude? I know it's a hard topic, probably the hardest topic of the semester. Yes, Dollar?
In general, someone not recording a covenant, how do you analyze that they didn't record the covenant?
So there's no requirement to record a covenant for it to be horizontal privity, right? You can have horizontal privity even if the covenant is not recorded. Where it actually makes a difference is when you get that to vertical privity, right? So let's say Abe sells his lot to D, and there's a covenant on it. If Abe never recorded it, D would purchase it without any notice. And so the question is D going to have the burden running to him? Right? I'm like 90% sure I'm right here, but I'm just couching a little bit. My general sense is if A never recorded his covenant, okay, the question would be, should D have been on notice that there might have been some reason why there was a covenant, right? So if there's some tall tower here,
casting a shadow, should Dia have been on some sort of notice about that? And that's an equitable question. As a matter of real covenant law, I don't think he's bound. But I think they can maybe enforce as a matter of equity. I think that's the answer. I'm like not 100% sure, but I think that's the right answer. That's why, in other words, always think of these questions as both covenants at law and about equitable servitudes. They're often related, but sometimes if it's not enforceable as a real covenant, you can get it as an equitable servitude.
So if there's privity of state, it doesn't matter that someone doesn't record the covenant
Under equitable?
under,
Well, equitable servitude requires notice,
right?
right? But notice is different than recording, right? You can have notice absence in official recordation. You can have notice by looking around. All right, that's why it's a lot easier to enforce an equitable servitude.
Well, I'm saying like privity of state, you don't need equitable servitude. Like there's privity of state, there's horizontal, there's vertical, it runs. So that if the covenant was never recorded at all, it still runs as normal.
I want to say yes, but I can't think the answer is yes. If there's no recording of the covenant, it would be fundamentally unfair to make someone be bound by it. I think my tentative answer is if there was no recordation of the covenant, I can't fathom it being enforced against D in the situation. I think that's my answer. I haven't considered that one before, but that's my tentative answer. I don't think that's the question your exam would worry about, because I haven't thought about it before, but I think that's the right answer. It always happens. People come up with stuff I never thought of. You're all smart students. You always think of things I haven't thought of. Yes, Lauren?
I know we probably need to move on, but.
Oh, no, I'm here as long as you want.
Okay.
I'm here for the rest of the day if you need.
Okay, so with the equitable servitude analysis of this portion of the question, if the member of the association did say, oh, we had equitable servitude, how would they even prove the privity part since they're not the ones transferring the land at all?
Say that one more time. I think I missed you somewhere in the middle.
With the privity portion of equitable servitude, how would that member of the homeowners association be able to argue that they had privity since they're not the one transferring the land? I mean, you can't, even in vertical, you can't transfer down.
Well, but that's the point of the homeowner association and the Ponset. It applies even if not everyone on the block agreed to it.
Okay, so
You can have like a majority rule type thing,
okay.
right? I mean, this is why again, I go back to Shelley v. Kramer. Not everyone on the block agreed to the racial covenant, but it was binding as a matter of equity in all of them. And it's a bizarre aspect of property law where you can have, say, maybe a 50% share of a neighborhood, and under equity might bind everyone. Doesn't work for real covenants of law, but might work as an equitable servitude.
So the seller of lot 2, whoever that was, 80, would have been bound through privity
As a matter of equity.
as a matter of fact.
I don't think that works, but that's the argument.
Okay.
I think they're good questions. What else? Wouldn't it be cool if classes had 12 people in it? Wouldn't that be like awesome? My section for next semester like 90 people. I am not looking. I love all my students, but it's hard when you have 90 people in a class. It's really hard. Anything more than 40 or 50, the dynamics are very different. It's a lot tougher. All right. So any other questions on number 1? I think we've beaten this one to a bloody pulp, but I think it was worthwhile. Alex, you're raising your hand?
Oh, no.
Let's
So
try.
for real covenants, they aren't enforceable if the assignee has no notice.
I think that's right.
Okay.
I think that's right. I'm like, that was Valerie's question. I'm like 90% sure of that. Her question was about notice about recording. I'm 90% sure that if it's not recorded, that the burden will run.
Okay, but if there's no actual notice, then you could still have an equitable servitude.
Yes, that I'm positive about,
Okay.
right? Yeah, because equitable servitude is notice, not recording, but notice, and you can have notice in various forms. Make sense?
let's look at number 2. I can't remember what question number 2 was. Ah, that's right. So a member of the homeowners association files suit against Bob, claiming that he is in violation of covenant number 1 for having a 6-story tower. Alternatively, the member argues that Bob should have been on notice that a 6-story tower would be prohibited. Okay? So let's go back to our facts, right? What was covenant number 1? All lot owners on Maple Street covenant to maintain one-family residential houses that are no smaller than 2 stories and no taller than 4 stories, right? So here, right, here we have a question about a burden, right? Does the burden run against Bob? Okay? And so the answer, it's a similar analysis, right? Is there horizontal privity? The answer is no. There's no horizontal privity because there was no land transaction when the covenant was imposed. What about vertical privity? Well, the complete estate was transferred, but in the absence of horizontal privity, there's no burden at all. But here, I think the equitable servitude question comes out differently. Because every single property on the block is a fairly small one-family home. And here, I think there should have been adequate notice under the principles of equitable servitude. And this absolutely does touch and concern the land, but the heights of buildings, and this privy of estate. So under the 4 factors of equitable servitude, I think he would be bound here. This is the McLean case. So that way I think number 1, number 2 come out a little bit differently. Number 1 was about the racial covenant, number 2 is about building heights. And this is more traditional, something that can be enforced as a matter of equity. So I think that's why 1 and number 2 are a little bit different. Okay, this one's a little bit easier, I think. Questions? Yeah, Ms. Valerie.
In general, when we're writing our answers, we don't want to say for the same reasons above, because you're not reading like.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that. Yeah. It's a bad example. You know, sometimes it's helpful to read something bad and have you know what to do better, like watching The Room. That's not how you make a movie. I saw it again the other night. It was insane. Spoons. Yeah, I think this answer. Yeah, it's more or less on the right track, right? I think the student here confused servitudes and equitable servitudes and covenants a bit, which is unfortunate. But all of you in this room, right, are on the right track. So anything in number 2? Oh, yes, sir, Robert.
Yeah. So on number 2, let me just repeat that back. It would possibly be enforced as an equitable servitude, but not as a real covenant, correct?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Even though number 2 is talking about, it actually says covenant 1, so it can be enforced as an equitable servitude, but not a covenant.
Yeah, and that's exactly that's a Tulp versus Moxie case, right? Even though you can structure something as a covenant, the court can still enforce it as a matter of equity.
Right. Okay.
That's the entire point of equitable servitude, right? They didn't touch, no pun intended, they didn't satisfy all the requirements of real covenants at law, but a court can still come as a matter of fairness and enforce it.
Yeah. So really, any sort of a real covenant question I give you, you should probably consider it also as an equitable servitude. Just you know, consider it on both levels, right? In the question, I say only consider this as real covenant, or only consider this as equitable servitude. Like I'll make it clear for what I want you to. But generally, one or the other you can probably hit. Anything else? Number 2. All right, let me look at number 3. Okay. What's question 3? I don't remember. All right. The homeowner association files suit against Bob, who refuses to pay the annual fee for violating covenant number 2. This was the how many dollars, whatever number of dollars it was. The homeowner association concedes that the covenant cannot be enforced as written, but argues that it should be enforced as servitude. Okay, so here, I want you to talk about servitude, right? The way I wrote this question, I'm really explicit. I want you to talk about the servitude question. So here, what you should be talking about is Neponsit, right? This is the area that Kaylee said her notes were somewhat vague on.
what does it mean to touch and concern the land? And here it would require you to go through the analysis in the Ponsit about what it traditionally meant. What I would hope you would answer is that common law, it was something very tightly connected to the land, but in the Ponsit case loosened that and said that it relates to or affects, I can't remember the word relates to, right? It relates to the land. And because having, nice lawns and having landscaping is important to aesthetics, that this touches and concerns the land under the Ponsit, I think that would be a very good answer. But you should also at least mention the other 4 elements, or the other 3 elements of the equitable servitude. I think that would probably be what I'm trying to instead. Yeah, so the equitable servitude questions are a lot easier than the covenant questions, because it's a little more fluffy. Okay, so any questions number 3? Alright, let's look at number 4. Oh, this is the nuisance question, right? So Dave sues Cam, right? This is our question, right? Dave sues Cam for the nuisance. Now, recall. Oh, everyone's seen this question? This is my only Photoshop question. I actually made like a Monopoly game board. I was actually very proud of this one. I considered doing this one, but the other one was a better question. I actually like changed things around, or like I flipped them. It was Mediterranean, Baltic versus Baltic and Mediterranean. So I was very proud of this one. The railroads questions were takings, waterworks with flooding, with a big wall. How wrong I was. It was in 2015. Anyway, back to the question. So the question was about the nuisance claim. So remember, there was only a lease here, right? And with the lease, the benefit will run, but not the burden. So D, right, Dave, is not going to be the one who has the burden. So if C is blocking the sunlight, C can't sue D. I'm sorry, D can't sue C. I say that again. D and C are not in privity because the burden didn't run. D can't sue C for the lights. Who would D actually sue? Landlord. He's on a lease. He sues A. A was the one who is in privity with C, right? A was the one who agreed to have this shadow cast upon him. And if he then rents the property out to someone else, it's A's problem. So the correct suit would be D sues A, and A has to take it out of pocket, right? A can't sue B or C. He agreed to it, right? He agreed to have his sunlight blocked. So I think that's the best way of answering this question. Right? This is a combination of a nuisance question with a privity question. Like it jumbles it all together. Right? If you start talking about Del Webb and whatever else, that's probably wrong. The question here is the fact that there's a burden. The shadow's being cast. Yes,
if it wasn't a lease, like say that D bought it outright in fee simple, could
Yeah. Okay.
sue C?
Right, so let's just say it was fee simple, right? Right? If D bought in fee simple, what would he have to complain about?
I guess like he didn't know, or
Right, so here's the question.
like did he have notice?
Yeah. Assuming there was notice and was reported, which I think it was in this case, he's screwed. He bought a piece of land that was burdened by a covenant. And when you buy a piece of land that's burdened by a covenant, you're stuck. Right? C is doing exactly what he was supposed to, which was having a tower which makes a shadow. Right? C was not misbehaving. Okay? Here is the burden, right? Let me put this another way, Mia. The burdened property can't sue because they're burdened, right? D agreed to be burdened. He can't sue for anything. The only time that there can be a suit is when the benefited property is in trouble, right? When the benefited property, when the dominant tenement, so to speak, is getting the problems, that's when a lawsuit happens. But when the serving tenement is getting served, he got served, right? He's the one who agreed to be benefited. I never saw that movie. Yes.
I have a question, but it relates to number 3.
Yeah.
I understand how it touches and concerns the land. I understand the privity there, but how would they be on notice? I mean, it's not like he has access to their bank accounts to see that people are paying for the. Because I would have argued.
Oh, I see your point. You're saying the notice element was weak.
Right.
Well, I think the question, what was the question? The question was about touch and concern.
But it was the annual.
Yeah. I think that's fair. Yeah. Yeah, you could have said that. How would he have been on notice that there was such a homeowner association to have such a agreement?
Right.
I mean, in reality, you ever go to a private community? It's like a sign that says this neighborhood is managed by such and such company.
Well, yeah, I mean.
And that's why they're there. Oh, you ever thought about that, right? Whenever you go into these private communities, there's always a sign saying this is managed by such and such homeowner association, deed restricted community, right? Those signs are there to put people on notice so they don't have this exact problem. I didn't put that in the facts,
I was
so
saying,
you're good.
facts, I can't assume that.
You're good. So I think that's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, very good. See, you guys are killing this. You're killing it. Yeah.
So for number 4,
Back to 4.
says, sorry, it says who should prevail. So the answer should be Cam because Dave can't even sue him.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The lawsuit, right, was Davis versus D versus C.
Can't.
But if it was in fee simple, then he could have sued Cam and Dave would have.
Under no circumstance can this side of the equation prevail for the shadow. It's almost like a trick question, right?
If it was a fee simple, then it would.
But even with a fee simple, what's he suing over? He could file a suit, but for what? He's bound.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So let me give it to you like this, right? The A plus answer here, right, should have been D can't sue C because the burden falls with his landlord. The only possible suit is D suing A, right? But nothing can be done against C. C is acting entirely lawfully. C has the covenant, is allowed to cast a shadow. So of course C is going to prevail. Right, so here's the art of writing a question, right? I say who should prevail, D or C? If I had said, how would I phrase it to answer your question? Who is liable for casting the shadow, right? That would make me think, oh man, maybe it's not D or C, maybe it's A, right? So I try to write these questions not to spoon feed you the answer. So your question you asked me is smart, right? You're thinking the next step. But I phrase it like this to not give it away, because I don't want to give away the ballgame. Oh, the clock's up there. I'm always very confused. They put it up there when they're exams. I'm always looking back next one. You guys are good. I'm here for the rest of the day, whatever you need. Okay, what else on question number 3 or 4? A good point, Laura, about the notice. That's a good point. All right, what's the last one? I think we already basically did it. But Tim, who the hell's Tim, right? Tim sues Dave, seeking to quiet title, determine the owner of lot number 1, who should prevail. And I think we already discussed this before, but the issue here is that Tim's deed was not recorded until after Oliver recorded his deed for lot number 1. Under the notice statute, Oliver would prevail because he did not have notice about this prior unrecorded deed. It's like unrequited love, but the unrecorded deed. Oh, I actually got one right. Right, so Tim should prevail because Dave. Tim should prevail. What? Dave did his own. Oh, the question was about Dave.
Yeah.
I was answering the wrong question. I'm sorry. I'm an idiot. Right, so the question wasn't about Tim and Abe. The question was about Tim and Dave. So here, Tim can prevail because Dave was on notice. Okay, why? Because by the time Dave came along, Tim had recorded his deed.
So Dave should have gotten notice that something was up. So Abe was okay. Abe behaved properly here. But Dave should have gotten notice that there was something missing in the chain and that there might be a conflict between Abe and Tim. Okay. And also Dave should now be able to sue Abe on the general warranty deed. I think that's correct. I think that part's right. Yeah, Valerie?
So would you argue average possession for A since Tim did not come back and A was there for like 16 years? And if
So,
would you answer it?
let me answer your question a couple different ways. I didn't mention in the exam anything about a statute of limitation for years for a prescription period, which is probably your first hint that's not what I was looking for. If you did want to argue that though, there's not any information about state of mind. There's not much information about continuity. You don't know how long. Did I put this in here? I think I said, I said that Abe lived there. What did I think I might have anticipated this question. He's lived there since 1913, right? And the year's 1920. So even assuming a 10-year period, which isn't anywhere in evidence, it probably wouldn't be long enough. I could have added average possession to that, but I think I deliberately didn't for that reason.
Because if there was, then
Well, then if Abe acquired it via adverse possession, how would Dave have even known that?
yeah, so he wouldn't be put on notice. Isn't it true that even though there's like a break on the link, an exception to that is adverse possession?
Right, so if he adversely possesses the land, then Tim's lawsuit would fail, because Tim no longer has any claim to it. Right, if Tim knew that this guy was squatting for a decade, did nothing, he loses his claim. He can't sue a subsequent buyer. So even though Dave screwed up by not doing a good title search, he would still prevail because Tim is out of the picture. I think that's right.
I have a question from somebody who's watching online. Hold on, let me see.
Who is it? Who is it? Who's
Hey, SA, I'm not gonna say no names.
Who is it? S.A.?
SA.
Oh, S.A. Okay. Hi, S.A.
He wants to know if the 1920 date on the exam means we can't use cases decided afterwards by Shelley, and that's, I would assume, yeah.
Yeah, I was mostly talking about Shelby Kramer. In my common law class, I'm very strict about this, not so much here. I primarily did this so that you would answer the racial covenant question as a matter of property law, not as a matter of covenant law. I can't remember what year Napon's was, 1923, 1926? I'm gonna check on the year. For property, I don't care much about the year. That's not my concern. But thank you, I said. Any other questions outside? Just text Lauren, okay? Just she'll filter them forward.
I think Rapunzel was 1938, does that sound about right?
Is that late? Okay, and I stand corrected.
That's all I have.
Yeah, you might be, you're right, I can't remember. Those were earlier. In common law, I know the years of the case, I'm not here, I don't memorize it quite as much. One thing I love about property is that year after year, the case is basically the same. Oh, I got the table of contents for the 9th edition. They totally revamped it. They moved everything around. They cut out like entire chapters. I am not happy. I actually complained on Twitter. The author emailed me. I was like, come on, let's talk about it. I was not happy. Students next semester are not going to be happy about it. I'll survive. All new cases. Although they added the Papa versus Hayashi case. Remember the baseball?
Yeah.
Yeah, they added that as a full case. They delete a lot of stuff as well. I'm not happy about it. What other questions, Lauren, from the people
Nobody
in
else
Keller?
is sitting.
No one's texting Lauren. Pull up the phone, please. Yes, Kelly. Oh, it's about the exam?
Well, I mean, it has to do with covenants again.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. Okay, so could you reconcile McLean and Shelley v. Kramer? Why was there constructive notice in McLean but not in Kramer?
Wait. So Shelby Kramer was a constitutional law decision.
Okay.
The court, the justices,
Is that just for
high,
everything?
they don't like dealing with property law. They wanted to make a ruling about enforcing racial covenants in court.
Or sorry, not behind, actually.
Right, this is why I asked the question the way I did. I have long argued that Shelley v. Kramer should have been resolved on property law reasons, and because there was not intent to bind, you couldn't enforce it as either a real covenant or an equitable servitude, right? You can't enforce it as a real covenant because you have horizontal privity. You can't enforce it as a equitable servitude because it doesn't touch and concern the land. So I think Shelley v. Kramer reached the correct result, but for a unnecessarily broad reason. They could resolve that much narrower grounds. They wanted to make a fancy roll with the Supreme Court common law. I'm not answering your question, am I? You look utterly unsatisfied, I'm sorry.
No, it's because I kind of, I didn't raise the question as well as I should have. I actually meant to ask about the intent to bind.
Well, with Shelley v. Kramer, there was an intent to bind. That part was pretty clear, right? The white neighbors said, we want to make sure no one allows African Americans to move onto this block. They were pretty damn clear about that. That part there was no doubt. And I suppose there was notice as well because they probably were very clear in telling prospective home buyers, you're not welcome here. But the element of the equitable servitude test that would be, I think, in doubt is the touch and concern part. Does that get to your question a little bit?
Yeah, the touch and concern element is an issue because it doesn't really affect the land, it's more
Who? Bingo, who. It's not the what, it's the who. It's who's living on it, right? Which is traditionally not something that servitudes go on. It's how to use the land, what you're using it for, not who's living there.
Okay, so there wasn't an intent to bind, even if.
Oh, there absolutely was. The covenant and Shelley v. Kramer could not have been clearer that they wanted to bind the successors. That part's straightforward. 90 minutes for one question, we're right on pace. David, yes sir.
I have a question about covenant title.
Okay, I'll be happy. Let's answer questions from either people in the room or anyone at home watching on the final exam from a couple of years ago. Going once, twice. All right, David, go ahead.
Just to make sure I understand, if I have, let's say, statute of limitations for color title's like 5 years, and
Okay.
I have like color title, but like the person who sold it to me, it wasn't really their land.
Right.
But I have color title and I'm on the land for more than 5 years.
Right.
Is the land
So let's just review. What's color title? Let's make sure we remember.
like a deed that really isn't?
In what context is color title relevant? When would it be relevant? Right. So this comes up in our unit of adverse possession, right? If I say, David, look, I'm selling you this black acre land, and here, look, I'm giving you a deed. The deed's fraudulent. It's a piece of garbage, right? It's not worth the paper it's written on. But David thinks in good faith in giving me a deed. Under Texas law and law, I think all states, if you're squatting with a piece of paper that looks legitimate, color of title, the time period's less. So it might be, I think, 10 years for adverse possession, but it drops down to 5 years if you have color of title. All right, so what's your question though?
So more than 5 years, okay, like let's say it's 5 years color title.
All right.
There, I think I legitimately had it.
You have your title
And then, like 6 years later, the real owner comes, like, hey, that guy didn't really own it, this is my land, get off.
Well, that's exactly right. You would defend against the eviction by citing adverse possession that you acquired in 5 years due to the color of title.
So it's,
Yeah, it's your benefit.
okay.
Right, you want to reward people who are squatting with some sort of paper because they were basically duped, and it's a matter of fairness. Yes, Valerie?
So color of title, you don't really have a requirement to search a chain of title.
It's a separate question, right? You don't have with adverse possession, you don't get into the recording statute and other sort of things, right? It's if you have something that made you think you had title, that's good enough. I'm sure someone will ask you in follow-up, what happens like, if it was written like in the back of a napkin or something? Well, you can have a deed that is lacking formalities, right? Before there were lawyers in every jurisdiction, people would sometimes draft property agreements on the back of a newspaper or something, whatever. Statute of frauds, signature, doesn't have to look pretty. So you can have something that's pretty crude that looks like a deed. If you have it, you think you have it.
Yes, sir.
I have a question from out of class. We have it's about touching concerning with equitable servitude.
Our favorite topic, right?
Yeah. So they're asking if the touch and concern has to do with the parties being affected, or if it's just if it's like touch and concern the land itself.
Yeah. Is that your question?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is I think Kelly's question from a minute ago. From the deposit, the court basically said if it relates to the land, it touches the concern. So under modern law, equitable servitudes are enforced very, very broadly.
And does it have anything to do with how it affects the actual parties, like the owner and the...
No. In fact, under the Ponce case, even if it just affects like money for landscaping, that's sufficient. So I mean that basically removed the touch concern element from the entire analysis. What else? Yes, Robert. Where did you hear from?
I got a question from one of your past exams about the basketball players.
I don't remember it, but I'll do my best.
A real simple question for you then. Does the, for tacking, you have an adverse possessor, and it gets thrown out by another adverse possessor, and then that first adverse possessor comes back, in the context of tacking, does they have to restart the clock if he's been thrown out?
Oh, I remember this question. So hold on, let me make sure I get it right. This was from a couple years ago. So imagine this, right? You have
One person squatting, and he's there for a number of years, and then person number 2 throws at person number 1 and starts squatting, and then person number 1 comes back and throws at person number 2.
Does he start?
I think there the rule is actually he resumes where he was beforehand. So the time from his first iteration is added to his time for a second. I think that's the rule. It's a very bizarre rule, but I think that's what I had on that exam. I'm not sure.
Wouldn't it not be continuous because it was disrupted?
It was disrupted, but there's like a fairness rule that if a squatter himself was thrown out, you don't toss out his initial time, right? In other words, the continuity requirement was there only because of malfeasance. Even though all squatters are behaving poorly, the person who was there and was thrown out by force, there's no privity between the two for sure. But I think you actually keep the first ticking of the clock from the first time you add it. I think that's the rule. I can't recall if that's right. Let me put it this way: if I put this sort of question in the exam and you know the answer, I would probably take either one correct as long as you explain it. So I think Kaylee, your answer is, well, it's not continuous if we don't count. I think that's a good answer. The other one is, well, as a matter of fairness, you shouldn't disqualify the person because it wasn't his fault; he was not continuous. I think either answer would probably be correct. Rob, you want to add more?
Sure. Moving on from that, for the tolling of an adverse possession clock, are both being psychotic and in a coma, are they both disabilities?
So I'm trying to remember that question. Yeah, I think there were several disabilities in that question. Psychotic, and which one came first? I can't remember.
I think the coma was first, but I'm not sure.
Right, so you can't tack multiple disabilities, right, as a matter of adverse possession law for purposes of tolling. So if the first one was a coma, you have to wait till the person comes out of the coma. And once the person comes out of the coma, then you can start ticking the clock. So if it was it after the coma became psychotic,
Yeah.
you can't double up.
So the coma and psychotic on their own, which both count as disabilities for our purposes?
Well, look at it this way, right? Let's say he's in a coma for a year, right? He wakes up, and the next month becomes psychotic. Then you told again, right? It's back consecutive, right? You can't make the period nonstop. But let's say someone has a disability and they recover from it completely. Then you start squatting on it, and the clock starts ticking. But then they go into a psychotic episode, and you have to stop the clock. So in other words, don't squat against people with bad health. That's the rule. But the more usual scenario this comes up is like if the person is
5 years old, you toll it till he's 18, right? But let's say before he turns 18, he gets like, some massive disability, right? During that initial disability period, you can't extend it. But if there's a gap between them, you can stagger them. I don't think I've ever asked it like that before from the question. That's how it would go, I think. Yes, ma'am.
So, the clock stops whenever the person gets a disability, cause the way I understood it is that, like, if you're trying to like adversely possess land, and then a disability happens, then the clock, it
Stops.
doesn't,
It pauses.
so it stops.
Yeah, it pauses. If the disability then disappears, the clock resumes. Unless it's like a permanent disability, let's say the person's in a persistent vegetative state, like Terry Schiavo, right? They're never waking up. In that case, the clock stops for the rest of the person's life.
I don't remember, I think you touched on this in class. What
Did I
about-
concern it or no?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What about incarcerated food owners? Is that?
So some states, I don't think Texas does, but I think some states actually treat incarceration as a disability.
Okay. Would
Um,
you- for-
I would tell, I never asked about that, I don't think I would.
Would you tell us if something is a disability, because it seems like something that.
I would, in past exams, I've made it really clear if it's some sort of sickness or ailment. I would not ask for something like a prison sentence. Some states actually have, if you're a member of the service and you're deployed overseas, you're considered disabled for purposes of adverse possession, because you can't, perfect your property. And that comes up in, I think California, someone told me, has a provision that if you're in jail, you're disabled for purpose of adverse possession. I don't think Texas has that. Yeah. Yeah, generally, if you're in jail, your property's gonna be taken away from you anyway. You're not paying your bill, not paying your mortgage, not paying your taxes. I mean, so it's probably some good point, but I don't know. Yes, Robert?
Under,
He's the only person who wears name tag after the compliment. So I think the next semester, I've been thinking about this, is instead of printing them out, I'll just give you blank ones and let you write your own name, whatever nickname you want, because everyone likes different variations. I'll give these big poster markers, and it'll be a little bit easier. So I think we'll plan for next semester. Yeah, Robert?
in 1975, in New Jersey, under Mount Laurel,
Yep.
they created that affirmative responsibility to create a space for low-income housing.
Right.
Is that just a New Jersey thing, or is
Yes,
that
it's a Jersey thing.
okay. After that,
No state, to my knowledge, has adopted that moral approach. If it was an outlier.
Just real quick, I wanted to clarify on the disability stuff. So you said that when someone's adversely possessing the land and a disability comes up, then the clock pauses?
Yes.
Okay, but then if another disability comes up while they're still incapacitated, there's no.
No, you don't extend it, right? So the question Robert asked was, if there's a disability, the person heals, and like the following year they get another disability, you stop the clock again.
Okay, so there just has to be a gap.
Yeah. Some sort of gap, and I think that was part of the question, how long the gap was, but I think that was the question. Ms. Valerie?
Jumping to covenants, future covenant case, the case about the guy who bought property that was on a lake, that was illegal. And then he said he couldn't recover on the future covenant because the government hadn't sued him yet. It was like Frimberger versus Angelotti.
Oh, yeah.
So, that one said he couldn't recover yet because.
Oh, it wasn't a covenant, it was an environmental restriction, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, the covenant has warranty on title, not.
Oh, I see what your point is, okay, it wasn't a real covenant law.
Yeah.
Okay.
So why wasn't that title just unmarketable to begin with?
It probably should have been, right? I think I mentioned this in class, but it probably should have been a marketable title. But the Connecticut court didn't want to issue a rule that any land subject to these environmental regulations is not marketable, because it would basically make a lot of environmental laws very damaging to real estate law. So I think that's probably the answer. But you're right, I think under common law, that would have been an unmarketable title. What else?
What was that, Miller?
No, it's Frimberger versus Ancelotti. It was a Connecticut case, right?
I'm not sure what's
Yeah, I
from.
think it was Connecticut.
The other one she's talking talking about was the.
Lohmeyer.
Yeah.
Lohmeyer versus Brown, was it?
Bauer.
Was it?
Bauer.
Bauer,
Yeah.
FB.
Like in that one, I think it was unmarketable. Or no, it was marketable.
Yeah.
Because, it was subject to a zoning ordinance.
But it didn't violate it. Right, the
No,
rule.
it did.
No, the house violated the,
Yeah.
it was like over the line or something.
Oh, that was
So
it.
that made it unmarketable.
That's right. Yeah, that
Because
was
it
it.
was in
That was it.
violation.
Thank you for reminding me. By the way, that case, not in the book next year. I'm very unhappy about this.
Okay, so before closing, during that executory period, if it violates an ordinance or any other regulation, it's still marketable even.
Under the Frimberger case, but not under the Lohmeyer case.
Under the, okay.
Yeah, there's actually a dispute of authority on that one. I suspect the Connecticut case is probably the majority rule, and the other one, was Kansas, right, Lohmeyer? The Kansas one's probably the old rule.
Yes, common law rule. Yeah, Valerie, your point's correct. In the Frimberger case, they said, well, the government hasn't gone after you, so you're still okay. Which is not very reassuring for a property owner. Because they basically just wait till you shut down. You don't have a text you, Lauren? No one's texting you? They don't love you. What? Yeah, Valerie, go ahead.
Alright, so I have a question on mortgages. So for damages, if the foreclosure sale, you figured out it wasn't right, so you could either get the difference between the fair market value and the price actually paid, so like monetary damages,
Right.
or if the government finds that they acted in bad faith, they can nullify the sale.
They can set aside, that's right.
But if there's a bona fide purchaser, you can't nullify the sale, right? Because the bona fide purchaser keeps the property.
No. If they find that the sale was not properly advertised, they can actually set aside the sale, and even a bona fide purchaser value is screwed. They actually lose the property. This is one of these really extreme remedies where if the sale, let me give you a different example, right? Let's say, forget about notice. Let's say the sheriff put a piece up for auction, right? The auction for sale, and it turns out that the hearing wasn't properly conducted, so that the person actually would have been able to pay the final payments. Courts will actually set aside the sale and say, sorry, you lose. Even though you were BFP, we'll give you your money back, but you're out of luck. That does happen. It's a fairly rare extreme remedy. What else?
For takings, just for general, if it's a actual taking, we only analyze kilo, right?
Loretto?
No, kilo.
Oh,
Actual
kilo. Oh,
taking,
yeah. So, yeah, an actual physical taking of land, it's kilo, that's right.
And then if it was regulatory, we go through those other.
Yeah, you
5 or
go
6
through the
steps.
steps, sorry.
And for that, for word count purposes, do you actually want us to specify the name of the case?
I
or
would
do
like you to.
Okay.
It's only one word extra. It's an important word. Loretto, Central.
So we'll say, this is not like Loretto when there was an actual physical
Yeah.
touching of the property.
Yep.
or-
Magic, huh? What else? What else? Yes, sir.
I wanted to see if you could kind of explain reciprocal negative easements. I understand they're kind of, I mean, they're not.
Reciprocal negative easements, right? That's sort of like the example I gave before, right? Let's say lot number 1 agrees, I'm gonna build a factory here. And lot number 2 agrees, I'm gonna build a high-rise here. Okay? So they're both benefiting and both burdening, right? Lot number 1 gets to the factory and puts the smoke on lot number 2. Benefit and burden. Lot number 2 gets to build a high-rise, but they're stuck with the smoke. So the way it works is they're both reciprocal. They're both benefiting and both burdening each other. They're both dominant and they're both serving, right? So again, this is an important point. the same piece of land can both be dominant and servient in that context, depending on which one you're looking at.
And so with those, are those generally in writing, or are they something that's implied,
Well, easements are generally in writing, but you can have courts imply easements in cases of necessity. Those are fairly rare. Right, you're not going to have an easement by necessity to hold a factor, right? It's going to be an easement by necessity to, like, get water, or, like, access a road, not to have a high rise. So that's sort of easement I think would have to be in writing. What else? Yes, Valerie?
Does items and nons or whatever not apply anymore?
Oh, the item sonats. This was the doctrine. Remember the case where they misspelled the name? They had, like, there were a couple letters off in the name. But that was something of an outlier case. I probably shouldn't teach that case anymore. I'm not sure why I do. There are other parts of the case I like. It's a doctrine of very little utility, especially today with full text searches and computers. It's not very important. But I think the more important lesson is, if you're a title searcher, you're going to search for variants of spelling that are common. I've had students in my class who do title searching, and, like, let's say the name is, like, William. They're going to search for Bill, Billy, Will, right? They search for all the different variants of the name to be sure. And if you have a competent title search company, they're going to do that. I haven't seen the item sonance doctrine have much weight. That was a California case, I think? Of course it was, yeah. I haven't seen it have too much weight outside of it. So unless I ask you about it, that's probably not what we're looking for. I mean, I think I've asked about it once or twice, but it'll be really obvious if that's what I'm asking about.
Would it be too much for you to, like, draw a timeline showing us when a buyer can sue under the contract of sale or under
Yes.
warranty? Yes, or is that
No, it'd be too much. I'm not sure. If you give me a specific question, can I answer? I can't, from memory, recreate an entire lesson.
Okay then, what, I know you assigned this one, it was just literally one paragraph on the merger document.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when can a buyer, I guess, sue under I know for under a general warranty deed, the covenant somewhat present, and then you can sue under those, like, right after. And then the other ones
You're asking
are-
about something else, right? So is your question, I'm trying to remember, I don't.
It's like, basically, how, under, what can a buyer sue for during the executory period versus post-closing?
Right, okay. Now I think I answered your question. So let's say, you're in the closing process, you're signing all the paperwork, and then before you deliver the keys, a hurricane strikes and it wipes the house off the map, right? At what point is the process over such that you could rescind during the executory period, right? And try and get out of it. As I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think I'm right, under the common law rule, the burden was generally on the buyer until, the burden was on the buyer during the executory phase. But under the modern approach, as I recall, during the executory phase, the burden still remains with the seller. So if there's some sort of unforeseen risk, under the modern rule, it's on the seller's burden, and the buyer could either back out or sue for damages. I'm pretty sure that's the rule, but I don't have all my notes in front of me at the moment. But I appreciate the question. I can't draw you a timeline, I don't know. What else?
Did that question relate to equitable conversions or no?
Merger and equitable conversion are actually somewhat related, so yes.
question of the first exam.
On the what?
The second question of the first exam with the monopoly.
Oh, yeah.
It talks, there's a sentence in the instructions that say New Jersey applies all common law property rules as articulated in the restatement first of property.
Yeah.
That threw me off because I was thinking, all common law rules, but then I'm like, this is a Jersey case. So I guess my question is like, when we talk about the first restatement of property,
I think I made it New Jersey because it's Atlantic City.
made it New Jersey.
So the Monopoly Game Board is based on Atlantic City, that's why I did that.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
My American joke.
I knew it's unfair, but yeah, so, no, the Monopoly Game Board is actually the very streets in Atlantic City. It was a game built during the game was created during the Great Depression to give people a sense of happiness, and the guy with Milton Bradley, I think, who actually made it, lived in, Milton Bradley was his name, lived in Atlantic City, New Jersey, so I think that's what I was getting at. But there was there, I can't remember, was there actually a New Jersey beach case on there? Oh, that's right, there was a beach question on there that did involve New Jersey law, that's why I put that in there.
Right.
And that one, I want to talk about New Jersey beach law.
New Jersey beach law.
Yeah.
As opposed to the common law.
Yeah, because the New Jersey rule is a little bit different, that was there where you could walk across the vertical versus horizontal axis. I think that's what I was getting at there. Yeah, there used to be another New Jersey case in the casebook which they removed, they were just taking out the good stuff. I like that a little better. Yeah, they completely rejiggered the book on it. I'm not happy. You don't care. You're done. You never want to look into this ever again. After tomorrow, you're just screwed off. Forget it. Tomorrow at 9 p.m. You guys are at the bar. Yeah.
Can easements and gross be inheritable?
Easement in gross be inheritable. I'll be honest, I don't remember the top of my head. I'd have to check my notes on that, but I don't know the top of my head. If anyone has it handy, it looks up, and I don't have it handy.
Easements and gross? Yeah, they're alienable.
They're
At least
alienable.
at least that's what I have in my head.
Yeah, I know they are inheritable. I think the answer is yes. I'm racking my brain, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Yeah, you're right.
In Tahoe Sierra, when they're talking about the moratorium, and they said that if there's a finite period of time, it does not constitute taking.
Right, that was Stevens.
But if they had an option to renew for another 5 years, that was like indefinite, is that still fine taking?
Well, I mean, this was Scalia's point in dissent, right? That this is basically, it can go on forever and ever and ever.
Right. So
It's a ruse to say that it might actually be suspended or go on forever.
okay.
Yeah, the new book, they cut out Lucas, they cut out Nolan, they cut out Dolan, all the Scalia opinions. But basically, it was temporary in name only. It was basically infinite.
And that's enough to say that it's a finite, since it's finite, it means it's finite for the purposes of that law.
Yep. Yes,
Can New Jersey go state to create easements in common law as well?
No. You can have an easement without horizontal privity. What else? Going once. Going twice.
Okay.
Almost got over.
Okay, you can ask it.
Okay.
You came here on a Sunday, you're allowed.
Alright. Okay, so you said that for easements, horizontal privity is not required, but if you ask us to, if it's a common law jurisdiction, then it does have to, the easement does have to be transferred along with the title, right? Or in the land transaction.
So,
I remember there was this one case, and it was basically, it required like a 1-2 kind of step. You couldn't just say, there's an easement now.
It. Yeah, hold on a second.
I think it was the church one.
Yeah, no, it was a church case, right. But that was for benefiting a third party.
Okay.
right? That's what they want an easement to benefit a third party. That's why that's the extra land transaction.
So you can sell someone an easement without selling them land.
That's a common law?
Yeah. Alright. Going once. Twice. Thank you all for this semester. I'll see you when I'll see you.